Hey everyone, and welcome to a deep dive on, well, you could say a pretty major figure, Charlemagne. We're going deep with those excerpts you sent over from his German Wikipedia page, Karl der Grosse.
Mm,
And if you're here with us, I'm guessing you're ready to move past the Charlemagne basics, right?
Definitely. I mean, there's a reason this guy still fascinates us after more than 1,000 years. Military campaigns, building an empire, a legacy that echoes even now. It's a lot.
Totally. So let's rewind all the way back. The man, the myth, the legend, who was Charlemagne? Like really, beyond just the emperor.
It's wild, actually, how little we know about his early life. Almost like he just appears fully formed as this king. But we can piece together some clues by looking at his family, the Carolingian dynasty. These weren't just powerful people, they were sharp. We're talking a Europe where you've got the papacy, all these different kingdoms, even the Byzantine Empire, all wanting to be top dog. The Carolingians knew how to survive that.
Okay, hold on. That's a lot to process. So picture 8th century Europe. It's a mess of competing powers. That's the world Charlemagne was born into.
Exactly. And his family, the Carolingians, they were masters at playing the game. Strategic alliances, smart marriages. They set the stage for Charlemagne's rise. And understanding that context is so important because it shaped his whole worldview, his ambitions, everything.
So it's like inheriting the family business, but instead of a bakery, it's, well, a kingdom about to explode into an empire.
That's a great way to put it. And Charlemagne, he didn't just inherit land. He inherited this ambition, this drive to grab power, make his influence huge. But it wasn't handed to him. His military campaigns, that's what really made his reputation. That's what made him powerful.
Right, and those campaigns, as the article lays out, they were massive. We're talking Saxons, Lombards, Avars. Charlemagne was practically redrawing the map of Europe with every win.
And this is where it gets interesting, because we have to square that image of Charlemagne as this great unifier with how brutal warfare was back then. Look at the Saxon Wars, for example. 30 years, that's how long he fought them, and they were a pagan people. His victory, it didn't come cheap.
Yeah, the article even mentions the Blood Court of Verdun back in 782. Thousands of Saxons executed on Charlemagne's orders. Not exactly a fairy tale ending. This was about power, and often it was brutal.
Exactly. But it's not like Charlemagne just used brute force. What people miss is that he wanted to integrate the people he conquered, make them part of his realm, not just keep them down. We see this with his Missi Dominici. Basically, they were like royal inspectors. They made sure his laws were followed, that his authority meant something, even in the farthest corners of his empire.
So it's like he knew that a real empire, one that lasts, it needed more than just a strong army, right? It needed a system, something to hold it all together.
Exactly. And that's where his legal reforms are so important. The article talks about the Capitularies and the Admonitio Generalis. Both show how much effort he put into making his empire more unified and, importantly, more Christian. And these weren't just ideas, they were practical. Regulating trade, even making sure weights and measures were standardized, the foundations of a real society.
Man, to think about just the logistics of ruling something that big, that diverse, it's mind-blowing. But this focus on law, on order, it shows a different side to Charlemagne, don't you think?
Absolutely. And it's that complexity that makes things really interesting as we dig deeper than just Charlemagne the Warrior King.
Okay, so we've got this warrior king, right? Building an empire, trying to make some kind of order out of, well, chaos. But the article makes a big deal about his religious side, too. It's like he thought he was on some divine mission, you know?
Oh, absolutely. You can't understand Charlemagne's rule without getting that he was deeply religious. And, I mean, this wasn't just him talking the talk. He truly believed Christianity was the core of a strong, unified empire.
Right, and the article mentions this thing called the Carolingian Renaissance. Sounds kind of familiar like the Italian Renaissance, but like way earlier. What's the connection there?
You're spot on with that comparison. Charlemagne, he was all about reviving learning, bringing back culture, especially within the church. Founded schools, pushed for scholarship, even standardized handwriting. Can you imagine? Making sure everyone's writing is the same, just so those texts are easier to read and share.
Wow. Talk about sweating the small stuff. This guy was thorough.
He was. And this wasn't just about being super holy, it was strategic. A smarter group of clergy meant a more united church, which meant what else? A stronger ruler. Plus, think about the practical side. If more people can read and write, you've got better administration, record keeping, even diplomacy runs smoother.
It's like he was way ahead of everyone else, realizing how important education was if you wanted a society that actually worked.
Exactly. But, and the article does point this out, things weren't so simple when it came to his personal life.
Yeah, about those multiple wives and the concubines. Not exactly what we expect from a devout Christian leader.
It does seem kind of off from where we are now, right? But the thing is, back then, power, politics, family, it all worked differently. When
Yeah.
people in the nobility got married, it was about strategy. It was about making your power stronger, building alliances.
So less a love story, more a power move.
Exactly. And look, we can't know all the details of his relationships, but I think it's safe to say that love, as we think of it, wasn't really the point. He even had this surprisingly close bond with his daughters, gave them freedom, influence, something you didn't see a lot of at court back then.
Interesting. So maybe not the cut and dry figure we see in some history books.
You got it. And that's what's so cool about digging into Charlemagne. You find the layers, the contradictions. You have to deal with the fact that history, it's messy. But hey, let's switch gears for a sec. We've talked about the man himself, but what about how his image, how we see him now, how was that made? The article goes into this a bit.
Oh, right, like Einhard's Life of Charlemagne. That's like the source for understanding him, isn't it?
It is, but remember, Einhard, he was Charlemagne's buddy, his advisor, super close, so not exactly an unbiased biographer, right?
Okay, so take it with a grain of salt. Like reading a rave review written by, I don't know, the author's biggest fan.
Exactly. And then there are the Royal Frankish Annals. Those were basically official records. Chronicles from his time as ruler.
So probably some propaganda mixed in there too, highlighting the good stuff, kind of brushing over the maybe not so great stuff.
You nailed it. All of that goes into creating this image of Charlemagne that gets passed down, the conqueror, the reformer, the devout king.
And while some of that's true, it's also, like we've been saying, more complicated.
Absolutely. And it's that messiness that leads us to, well, one of the biggest debates about his legacy, the whole Pater Europae thing, father of Europe.
Which, I mean, come on, that's a bold claim, especially given how different Europe was then. Like, do we even want to say Charlemagne is responsible for the Europe we have now? Where would you even start with that?
That's the million-dollar question, and folks, this one we're diving into right after this. Don't go anywhere.
All right, we're back and ready to tackle this whole father of Europe thing. Is that a title that actually makes sense, or are we just trying to force a nice story onto history?
It's a question historians have been wrestling with forever, and it gets at how we see the past, On the one hand, there's no doubt that Charlemagne's empire, it laid the groundwork for what would become Western Europe as we know it. I mean,
Right.
his push to unify everyone, make Christianity stronger, even grow a shared culture, that was a big deal.
But, and there's always a but, right? We've talked about his methods, how brutal things were. His world makes ours look like, I don't know, a picnic. Can we really compare them? Charlemagne's Europe and the Europe we live in now?
Yeah, it's a dangerous game to play, putting our values onto the past. Charlemagne, he was dealing with completely different problems, and he used, well, let's say different solutions. It's easy for us to just pick and choose the parts of his reign that fit a nice story and forget about how complicated it really was.
Like judging a fish on how well it climbs a tree, right?
Yeah.
Charlemagne was a product of his time, so we have to see his actions through that lens.
Exactly. And that doesn't mean his accomplishments were meaningless. But instead of trying to make him fit this father of Europe mold, maybe it makes more sense to look at specific things from his time that still matter today.
So less about him being the architect of modern Europe and more like, what were the building blocks he put down like that?
Right. I mean, look at his focus on education.
Yeah.
That had a huge impact that lasted way beyond his lifetime, even if part of it was about, controlling religion and politics, and how he tried to make laws clear, build a system of government. Those ideas, they didn't die with his empire.
It's like those ripples, the stuff you don't expect, but it ends up changing everything.
Absolutely. And that's what's so great about really going deep on someone like Charlemagne. You peel back those layers, you see the good with the bad, and you have to deal with the fact that history, it's messy.
So before we wrap up, what's the takeaway here? What do we want our listeners to walk away remembering about Charlemagne?
I think it's this. Don't be afraid to question those big stories, those labels we slap onto historical figures. Charlemagne, he breaks the mold. Brilliant military mind, but also capable of terrible things. Totally devout Christian, but also loved his power. He makes us think harder.
Right. He walked that line. He makes us confront the fact that history isn't simple, it's nuanced.
Exactly. And that's a good thing. The more we learn about the past, the more we realize it's still talking to us. It's not over.
And on that note, folks, we'll leave you with this. Thinking about all we've learned about Charlemagne, what parts of his reign really stick with you, especially in today's world?
Something to chew on.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of Charlemagne. And until next time, keep asking those good questions And most importantly, keep diving deep.
Thank you for listening. If you love history, don't forget to subscribe to History with Bree and Peter. Join us for more fascinating stories from the past. Hit that subscribe button and never miss an episode.